plants in the world, blueberries. Um, I've had a big interest in blueberries for a few years now. I grow a small patch at home of different varieties. And over the last 4 years, as a member of the small fruit team for the Master Gardener program, we've been renovating a patch of 440 blueberry bushes at Heritage Farm. They're pictured behind me. That's been a real learning experience and a rewarding one as well. We think it's important to have a webinar like this, not only because blueberries are a popular crop to grow in Clark County, but there's also a lot of conflicting information out there. And we would hope to sort that out for you and resolve those conflicts that probably arise out of, hand-me-down techniques that aren't based in science, ones that are out of date, or region-specific recommendations that may not work everywhere across the United States. So we want to focus around here. So we put together a lot of research-based information that's been peer-reviewed and applicable for Washington. And we're hoping to give you the information that you need to be successful in your endeavor of growing blueberries. We've timed this seminar for January on purpose because if you're just starting out and you don't have existing bushes, it's time for you to start shopping, choosing your cultivars, and preparing where your planting sites. If you have existing bushes, it's time for you to roll up your sleeve and get out there and do some good pruning so you'll have a good crop for the next few years. So it's a big topic. There's a lot of information, so we're going to split it up. I'll start off with a general description, cultivars, care and feeding, that sort of thing. And then I'll hand it off to Karen to go step by step on how to prune these bushes so they'll thrive and have good fruit production for many years. So why grow blueberries? Well, in case you need a little convincing, I would start with the fact that they're like #1 on every superfood list I've ever seen. And they have the benefit of being really tasty too. Add that with the fact that they're pretty pricey to buy in the supermarket, that makes it a pretty worthwhile expense. But beyond their food value, they also have landscape value. As you may know, they're pretty plants in the summertime with their glossy leaves. They turn beautiful colors in the fall. And then even when they lose their leaves, the new growth that's red and the older canes have interesting texture and color to the garden too. They have the added advantage of being easy to grow. And I say easy, let me say not too difficult. As long as you meet the basic needs of the plant, they are really pretty easy to grow. They're certainly not as onerous as taking care of a lawn for a whole year. So a few of the general characteristics. They're long-lived plants, they're deciduous shrubs. And I say long-lived, I'm not kidding. You can expect blueberry plants that are well cared for to be producing upwards of 50 years or more. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, our dig team transplanted some 70-year-old blueberries from woodland into our patch at Heritage Farm. It took them about a year to recover from the transplanting, but this year they're off and producing just like crazy. So those 70-year, I expect those 70-year plants to be here for many more. Importantly, one of the characteristics of blueberries is that they have shallow roots, they're fibrous, and they don't have root hairs on them. Now, most plants have root hairs to increase their surface area and help them take up water and nutrients. So the fact that blueberries don't have those root hairs put them at a disadvantage when they have to compete with weeds or grass and that sort of thing. Important consideration when you're planning where you're going to plant. You can expect most of the cultivars we're going to talk about today, certainly the ones that we'll recommend the most, to grow to be about 6 to 7 feet tall. The width varies by the cultivar, but 4 feet would be a typical, 3 to 4 feet would be a typical width. Grows in 2 flushes. every year. First of all, the flush that you see in the photo here, where the leaves and the blossoms are coming out, and then again after harvest, late August, that somewhere in there, there's a second flush that grows the new wood that is going to have the next year's fruit. So the fruit, the new twigs that grew last year will have this year's fruit. The ones that grow this year will have next year's fruit. We have a picture of that. I'm borrowing a couple of slides from Karen here, but I just want to point out where the fruit buds are here and give you some perspective. Each one of these fruit buds will produce 6 to 8 berries. So in these 5 buds that we have here, you have a potential for upwards of 40 berries. And that becomes important when you talk about balancing fruit and not breaking your limbs. And Karen will get into that. And here I just want to focus on the root zone. You see how shallow those roots are. They're very close to the surface, and you actually have to be careful when you're cultivating them. Important also to notice that the roots go out to about the drip line. So when you're preparing your planting site, you want to make sure that you leave a big enough area for the roots to stretch out to their full potential. And they don't have very many downward roots, which I would call like a taproot. Those 70-year-old plants that we dug up 2 years ago actually had a significant taproot that was over 2 feet long. We had to cut it off and a couple inches in diameter. So these things, once they're established, they are really stabilized. So cultivar selection is probably one of your first challenges, and this task isn't made easy by the information that we get from our nurseries and catalogs. It's going to be really important for you to read all the labels, get all the information you can get, and ask questions of the salespeople. And then I would go one step further and go look it up online and make sure you're getting the variety that you want, because it really does make a difference. And we're starting to see some bushes that don't really suit our climate showing up in our nurseries, and certainly they're on mail order. So with that said, let me first tell you right up front that if you're thinking about growing good fruit, and especially good fruit in the Pacific Northwest, you're looking for a northern high bush variety. One of those, they have many cultivars, probably hundreds to choose from. And the labels do a good job of explaining the size of the bush, the taste of the berry, and whether it's a mid, late, or early harvester. So you can get that kind of information from them. But be looking for the northern high bush if you're looking for fruit. They're well established in the Pacific Northwest. They agree with our weather. They like the acid soil, and they fit really well here. Nationwide, the northern high bush is the go-to bush for commercial production as well. There is a hybrid of the northern high bush called the half high. And you probably won't see that on a tag, but it's a cross between the northern high bush and the low bush varieties. And as you might figure, it's a shorter plant. So where the northern high bush is going to be 6 to 7 feet tall, the half highs are going to be 3 to 4 feet tall. The fruit suffers, but it can still be a good choice if you have limited space, or if you had a big container that you wanted to use. Southern high bushes are indigenous to the southern part of the United States. And as you might think, they don't do very well in our climate. They tend to flower very early, and they're susceptible to our late frosts. So there's usually some kind of frost damage there. And it takes a lot of heat to develop the fruit. Typically, we don't have enough heat units in the summer to develop the good fruit on the southern high bush. They are doing more research on these. They're trying to get the quality of a northern high bush able to grow in the south, but they haven't gotten there yet. I saw one of these in a nursery not too long ago. It was a variety called Jewel. They didn't say that it was a southern high bush or that it really wasn't suited well for this area, but they called it a semi-evergreen. The plant may grow here, but it's certainly not going to thrive and produce good fruit. Rabbit eye is another one that is indigenous to the southeast United States. It's a large plant that flowers very early and is usually damaged by frost in our area. So again, the fruit doesn't measure up to that of the northern high bush either. Some of my colleagues in the Master Gardener program are having some success growing a variety of cultivar of this called pink lemonade. So if you really wanted to try your hand with that, they are having some success with it. So you could give it a try. And I have seen it in the nurseries locally here. The low bush is indigenous to the northeast United States, up in the very cold part of the country. So they would grow fine here, but their fruit is lackluster, I'll say. But it has the advantage of only being 18 inches high. So if you want some fruit and you have a little niche or a container that you'd like to use, the low bush could be a good choice for you. So several strategies you might want to keep in mind when you're picking your cultivars. Technically, northern high bush or all the blueberries are self-fertile. So they will grow, produce some fruit if they do not have another cultivar there to cross-pollinate with. But if you do have more than one cultivar, your fruit production and quality will be much better. So if you can do more than one plant, you certainly want to have two different cultivars there. They also are categorized as early, mid, and late cultivars. The early, mid, and late refers to the harvest time, not the bloom time. So in the photo to the right here, there's 4 different varieties there. I think it's in March, and all of them are in bloom at the same time. So they're available to cross-pollinate. The difference being that the early ones will come on about a month earlier than the late ones. So you can use that in your strategy. What is it that you want? If you want to do something like jams or jellies and you need a lot of berries at the same time, then you probably want to use all the same harvest time. But if you want fresh eating for a couple of months, you can stretch it out through early July through almost September to have fresh berries if you use the early, mid, and late strategy. So once you decide, let me just emphasize again that you're not going to get all the information you need off the tags in the nursery or in the catalogs, and you really need to do some research to make sure that you're getting the northern high bush or the landscape specimen that you want. Then once you've decided which cultivars you want to do, it's time to select a site and get it ready to go. And like almost all fruits that I can think of, they require full sun. Some are labeled that they'll grow in part shade, but they may grow, but your production is going to suffer if they don't get full sun. They also require good drainage. So if you have tight clay or silt soils, you'll probably want to amend that soil. Just keep in mind that when you're doing the amendment, and you might use something like rotted sawdust, compost, peat moss, just keep in mind that those things in the soil are going to tie up your nitrogen for a while. So you'll need to add a little bit more nitrogen every time you fertilize to compensate for the fact that a lot of the nitrogen, some of the nitrogen has been tied up by that unfinished compost. You also need to keep in mind that root zone, and while the container that your plant came in is only a 1 gallon container, you need to go out that full 3 or 4 feet so the roots can get out there to their full potential. If that's all too much work, of course, raised beds are a great option for blueberries, and they'll do very well in there. Keep in mind that blueberries require acidic soil. We have acidic soil generally here in Southwest Washington, but usually not an acid enough for blueberries. We need to be down in the 4.5 to 5.5 range. So you need an accurate soil test in order to figure out exactly where you stand right now. And I recommend using a lab as opposed to off-the-shelf products because the labs are much more accurate, and they have the benefit of they'll give you information on how to lower the pH to the area that you need. So not only do you find out exactly what it is, you find out how to fix it. And do that as soon as you can, because it takes months for the amendments to break down and actually acidify the soil. So if you could start a year ahead of time, that would be ideal. But certainly you want to start as early as you can, and give them some space when you're setting them out. Most of the instructions I've noticed recommend, as little as 2 or 3 feet apart. But my personal experience shows that if you can go further, 4, 5, 6 feet apart, you'll be a lot better off because that gives you room to maneuver between your berries without knocking them off onto the ground. It also opens things up so you get good airflow and good light in there to ripen up your berries. So once you get them in the ground, then you have to take care of them. It's not too onerous, like I said. If you have tight silt clay soils, like we have, a lot of people have around here, you're looking at an inch and a half a week. And that needs to be all the way through the growing season, because remember, after the harvest, they start putting on their next year's wood. So they are growing the whole time until they go dormant. So keep up the watering if Mother Nature's not doing it for you, and check with your finger meter to see how well the amount that you're using is working for you, and adjust it from there. A thick coat of mulch is going to help you out by stabilizing that moisture, and also help you keep those weeds down. Has the added advantage of creating a barrier between the soil and your leaves that would keep out a lot of pathogens. Fertilizing can be a little bit complicated until you get it figured out. Blueberries can't use the nitrate form of nitrogen, and nitrogen is the main thing that they need throughout their life. They only use the ammonium form of nitrogen. So when you get a fertilizer, look at the label and look at what kind of nitrogen it's forming. Look for the word ammonium, ammonia, or urea. That way you know you're getting the right kind of fertilizer that your plant needs. This is also a pretty good case here in our area to use a synthetic fertilizer. I like to use organic whenever I can, but here, when we need to do our fertilizing, the soil is really cold. In March, my soil temperature is usually in the high 40s. Unfortunately, microbial activity really slows down to almost non-existent below 50 degrees. So if the synthetic fertilizers have the advantage of being available as soon as you put them on. They don't need the microbes to break them down for the plant. So if you're going to use organic fertilizers here in the spring when it's cold, be sure and put them in way ahead of time so the nutrients are available when the plant needs it the most, when it's making its blossoms and making its berries. We recommend making sure that you have the nutrients available for the plant when it really needs it, March, April, and May. And so you take your total amount of fertilizer that you want to put on and divide it into 3 applications. And then there's pruning, which Karen will get into. I just wanted to show you these blossoms here on the right. That is from about 5 buds. And we're going to have to do some pruning on this one to keep the berries from bending over and laying the twig on the ground. So establishing your plants in the early years is critical for that long life. Um, when you buy your plants, you'll see you get them in a container here. They're usually a year and a half old, or bare rooted plants that are 1 year old. All that really doesn't matter. Year one is the year you put them in the ground. Okay, so just treat them as brand new babies as soon as you put them in, even if you're buying a 1 gallon container. So that year you're going to need to strip off all the blossoms and don't let any fruit set, because you want all the plant's energy to be going down into the root zone. So the only thing you do to this, to your brand new plants, is remove the dead, diseased, and damaged wood, the 3Ds, and add a little bit of nitrogen to get them going. In year two, you're still concentrating on establishing that root zone. So you strip off most of the blossoms. You can keep a couple of them there to see what they're going to taste like. There's removing the 3Ds and then adding a little bit more nitrogen. You'll see as we go along to all the way to maturity, we keep increasing the amount of nitrogen as the plant grows. And then in year three, you can finally eat some berries. You can strip off a few of the blossoms to make sure we're still getting a good amount of energy down to the root zone. But you can start harvesting some. And then this is the year where you're going to be selecting the canes that are going to form the basis of the structure of your plant. And Karen's going to tell you about that. So in year three, we've gone all the way up to a whole ounce of nitrogen. And please note that I'm saying an ounce of nitrogen and not an ounce of fertilizer. So we know that a fertilizer is only part nitrogen, and you need to figure out how much of that fertilizer you have to put on in order to have an ounce of nitrogen. It's a little bit of a mathematical puzzle, but it's easy once you get the hang of it. You'll want to look it up online before you try it on your own. Be sure and check your math. So blueberries are well adapted for the Pacific Northwest, and so we don't have a ton of pests and disease. But the one pest that we all have to deal with all the time are weeds. Remembering that blueberries don't compete well with grass or with weeds around there, and they need a clear root zone in order to thrive and get their nutrients that they need. Birds, of course, are always present, and they have an uncanny knack of knowing when the blueberries are at perfect ripeness, and they'll come in and wipe out a whole crop in one day. So you're going to need a strategy to deal with them. You can get fake hawks and flash tape and those kinds of things, and they can work for a little while, but the birds are really motivated. They're going to figure that out and get to your plant pretty soon. So you're probably going to need some kind of netting. You can just throw bird netting over your plants, but that has a disadvantage of catching the blueberries in the net, and you lose berries every time you move your net. So many people resort to some kind of a structure like we have down here in the corner out of PVC pipe. Certainly not very attractive, but it can be effective. And I've finally settled on a T-bar kind of a support, where the T-bar is a little bit wider than the bed itself, and I can just drape the netting over that. Very easy to lift up the netting, go inside, do your business, and then come back out. So there's a lot of ways to do it. You can be creative and find out what works for you. There aren't many insects that bother our blueberries in this part of the country, but the one you probably hear the most about is the spotted winged Drosophila. It's a small fruit fly that lays its eggs in a soft fruit. Even if the fruit's infested, it's still safe to eat, but the ick factor is probably pretty high there when you think about eating fly eggs. So prevention is really the best control for these things. And like I said, they like to lay their eggs in soft berries. So it's important to pick up berries that are laying on the ground and harvest on time, because Once that fruit starts really softening, it makes them a target for the SWD. There are some chemical controls, and a couple of them are even certified organic. But keep in mind that even the organic sprays can harm beneficial insects as well. So you don't want to wipe out all your pollinators while you're trying to get rid of this little pest. If you choose to use those, be sure and follow the directions very carefully. Now this is, I looked at this slide this morning. I went, well, nobody's ever going to want to grow blueberries if they see all this stuff that can happen to it. Just bear in mind, it's not as bad as it looks. If you get the problem, you can certainly diagnose it and deal with it. We in the Anthracnose Clinic will be happy to help you. But your three main diseases, we'll call them, are fungi, bacteria, and viruses. Fungi like the mummy berry we see in this area results in dry, shriveled fruit, or anthracnose that rots the fruit after it's been harvested. They can be controlled mostly with cultural techniques. In other words, just keep things cleaned up around. Make sure you have a lot of air moving through your plant. Don't use overhead watering if you can help it. Generally, sanitation all the way around and good airflow. There are some copper sprays that you can use for prevention on this one. Some of those are also labeled organic for organic use, but know that these are preventive only. Once you have the fungus in your crop, the spray is not going to work. Pruning and cleaning up is the only option. Bacteria, the good thing about bacteria is if you're controlling for fungi, you're also controlling for bacteria, because the control is the same way, the same thing. In our patch at Heritage Farm has Pseudomonas in it, and there's a picture of it here in the middle. It only attacks the 1-year-old wood. See the red wood that was attached, and then the rest of the plant is unaffected. The bad part about that is that 1-year-old wood is where your fruit is, so you're liable to lose a significant portion of your crop. Anthracnose results in soft puckered fruit, alternaria fruit rot, only attacks the lower branches. So again, you want to use your cultural controls and sprays if you choose to do that as preventive measures. Viruses cause a necrosis of the flower leaf. It's flower leaf and stems. That's where they turn brown or black and look like they're dead. Blueberry shock is probably the most common that we have in our area. The necrosis sets in, the leaves drop, everything looks awful. And then when the bush does its second flush that year, it comes back to normal. It recovers and can be productive in the future. Note that I said recovers because the plant is still infected and it still can spread the virus to other plants. So you may want to consider removing that plant. Scorch is a serious disease that attacks portions of the plant at a time, and over about 4 years, that's a fatal disease. So what can you do about these? First of all, make sure that you're buying certified plants that are certified against having any viruses. And then the other is exclusion by removing the affected bushes, so they don't infect all of your bushes. So anyway, I don't want to overplay that because they are not all that bad, and you have help available. Those websites that Erica talked about at the beginning are there to help you with good research-based information. And of course, we're there at the Answer Clinic 4 days a week to, take your emails or your phone calls or your walk-ins once we get on the other side of this pandemic. I listed Hort Sense here because that's Washington State University's website that goes into in-depth treatment of diagnosing and treating problems. Then that's our local source. But now to the good stuff. Once your bushes get mature, you can expect about 10 pounds of of berries per bush. That varies widely on the cultivar that you choose. So just, plan. Most people will recommend about 2 bushes for one person for a year. And don't be in a rush to harvest. After veraison starts, and that's when the berries start to turn blue, the berries grow another 20%. And then once they look blue, ready to pick, they're usually about 5 days away from being at their peak ripeness and plumpness. So be sure to inspect your berries very, very carefully. Make sure there's no pink or red on there, and that the whole berry is blue and the stem is blue as well. A ripe berry will come off very easily with just a very slight twist. And what you're harvesting, depending on what your strategy was, you're either picking for 2 to 5 weeks, or if you have early, mid, and late cultivars, then you'll be able to eat for just about the whole summer. Once you bring them in, get them straight into the refrigerator. Don't wash them, because that shortens their shelf life significantly. They'll store about 2 to 3 weeks in the fridge. But if you spread them out on a baking sheet and it freeze the berries individually, and then put them in a Ziploc bag, they'll last for months. If you happen to have a vacuum sealer for those frozen berries, they'll last even longer. So here's a quick summary of a year in the life of a blueberry. We start out on the left. The top line is what the plant's doing, and the bottom line is what you need to be doing in response. So in March and April, March is a good time to plant. If you're starting out with new plants, you can get them into the ground as soon as you can work the soil without damaging the soil. So March, April, and May, they're budding out. They need fertilizer. So you remember, you divide up your dose into 3 separate applications. Then in July and August, you're harvesting and eating out your heart's delight. September, after the harvest, new shoots, that's going to be next year's fruiting wood, is coming out. So you still need to be watering. And then in November, you'll be able to see your buds, your fruit buds forming, and get a good feel for what your next year's crop is going to look like. After all that, you can take December off, but in January, when the plants go dormant, it's time to get out your pruners. So Erica, Karen's going to tell you all about the pruning, but before I hand you over to her, I'd like to just emphasize a few points that I think are really important. First of all, if you're looking for fruit quality, the northern high bush, a northern high bush cultivar is what you're looking for. You've got hundreds to choose from. They need low pH to actually produce their best, and they only use the ammonium form of nitrogen. Be patient with the harvest. Those early fruits are sour and hard. And you're going to have a strategy to deal with the birds. But after all that, do enjoy all the tasty superfoods that you're going to get. Now I turn it over to Karen, who's seen dutifully taking a soil sample that we sent off to a lab and had analyzed, and found out that our blueberries were trying to grow at a pH of 6.5. And that's why they were suffering so badly. After we changed that, got it down to more like a 5 right now, our harvest is really bountiful. So I'll turn it over to Karen right now.
Thank you, John.
Yes.
While John is stopping sharing and Karen is starting, I just want to indicate to folks that we have a Q&A going right now. So there's a chat box and there's a Q&A box, and I would encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box. That will allow John and I to see if we can help provide some answers while Karen's talking. And if you would save the chat box for things more like, technical issues or something like that, I will keep an eye on that chat box. So John, I think you'll be able to click on the Q&A and kind of see whether a question is open or has already been answered, and jump in and start helping to answer questions.
I'll give it a shot.
Thank you. And Karen, take it away.
Okay. Yeah, there were a few in the chat box. I was leaving for John. Okay, so I'm going to be specifically talking about pruning the blueberries. Now that you know how to plant them and take care of them, you're going to get a lot of growth, and you'll need to prune them. So first of all, why do you need to prune? Basically, pruning will improve the overall health of your plant, and that's really the major takeaway about pruning. Why are some of you here perhaps why do you need to learn about pruning? It may be that you have some new plants, so you want to know how to start off right with them, or maybe you've just moved into a new home that had blueberries already planted. It may be that you've had blueberries, they've been producing really well, but your production is starting to taper off, and it could be because you're either not pruning at all or you're pruning improperly. Or it could be that the size of your fruit is declining, and that also can be due to improper pruning, or it could be from lack of fertilizer or some of the other things that John talked about. But pruning can help keep the size of your blueberries at a good size. I actually have a friend who moved into a new home, and they had beautiful blueberry bushes, and I went over to look at them, and they were like, I don't know, they were like hedges. They were huge and overgrown. So they really needed to renovate their blueberries with good pruning. So it may be that you just have wildly overgrown bushes. And as true with anything, if you ask 3 people how to prune blueberries, you probably got 3 different answers. So hopefully we're providing university research-based guidance here. So hopefully these are the rules that you can take to heart. Okay, so we're basically going to go over 4 different steps. First, the anatomy. We're going to review the anatomy of a blueberry bush again. John went through it briefly, but it's really important to understand the terms when you're talking about pruning. So we're going to go over that again. Just the overall philosophy of how to approach pruning, the tools you're going to need, and then I'm going to go through kind of step by step what you do. And then we're going to end with a video. It's a short video, it's about 6 minutes, but it actually shows you how to do it. If we were doing this on a normal year, we would follow this class with a trip out to our Heritage Farm field, and you would actually have an opportunity to do some pruning. And I think that's the best way to learn. But unfortunately, we can't do that this year. So we'll have to do with a video. I would suggest you then, if you do have blueberries, you shortly thereafter go out and start approaching your bush while that information is fresh in your head, because the best way to learn is by doing it. If you have a neighbor or a friend who has blueberries, it might be good to get together safely with them and help each other out, because sometimes just 2 people remember things better than 1 person. Okay, so let's review the anatomy again. I won't go much into the roots or the crown because John covered that really well, more important for how to care for your blueberry. But from the crown up is the part that's important for pruning. So you have your canes, those are the major branches coming out of the crown. You're going to really want to know how to identify your canes, and particularly what's an old cane and what's a new cane. And then the branches that come off the canes are going to be important to be able to recognize. The shoots at the ends, and then of course your buds. And that's where this part is up here is the good part. This is where you're going to get your fruit. So you definitely do not want to approach pruning a blueberry like you would take to prune a boxwood or something like that and just give it a buzz cut, because you're not going to get very much fruit if you do that. You really have to look at the whole structure when you're pruning. And just to review again, the buds are also a very important part to recognize when you're pruning. And this will be so obvious when you go out and really look at your plant, which are the fruit buds and which are the vegetative buds. It's like night and day. So don't worry that, you know, am I going to be able to recognize what is what? If you just look at the ends of one of your shoots, you're going to see which are the vegetative and which are the fruiting buds. They're just, the fruiting buds are just much more full. And you do want some of each. You want kind of almost an equal, kind of a balance of each of the kinds of buds, because the vegetative buds are what's going to grow the branches, the shoots, or the branches for successive year production. And the fruit buds are what's going to give you fruit this year. So obviously you want to have some of each. So the overall philosophy is really, and I can't emphasize enough, once you go through this, there isn't really a whole lot to talk about with pruning because it's really a very simple concept. And you're gonna appreciate that at the end here. But basically you wanna, there's a couple reasons you're pruning, the whole philosophy for pruning. One is to keep the shape of the plant in a good shape, in a good form. So you want an open vase-like shape, if you think about a vase, to let air flow and sunlight in the inside. But you also need it to prune to fit in its space. So if you took John's advice and you planted them 4, 5, 6 feet apart, that's, you know, that plant has a lot of space to fill out. If you followed the advice on the label and you only left about 3 feet, you may need to do some extra pruning on the edges of your plant where it's kind of where they're growing into each other. Or if you have a row and a pathway, if you have more of a horizontal branch that's kind of leaning out into the path, you probably have to prune that out, or at least prune it back just to keep it out of the way. So first of all is looking at the shape. You want to look at it from a viewpoint of resisting disease. And the biggest thing there is just air circulation, so kind of opening it up. And also improving the light so that both the fruit can form and the fruit can ripen. So again, that's kind of opening up the interior of the plant. So the overall philosophy of this is if pruning equals better fruit. And you kind of need to prune every year. You need to go look at your plants every year and give them a little bit of pruning. And blueberries are so easy. You don't need many tools. You don't have to go out and spend a lot of money. Most people probably have all of these already in their shed. You need just a hand pruner. You need loppers. A pruning saw is sometimes necessary, not always. But in older plants, or if you're renovating an older plant, you'll need a saw. And you need some kind of disinfectant. And we're going to go through each of these. So there's 2 kinds of hand pruners. There's the anvil type pruner, and this is the kind that has the one side of the ends here is flat. Whoops, sorry. And the other side is the blade that comes down on it. These are not good for blueberries because your blueberries are going to be nice, live green wood. And those things kind of smash the end and kind of tear it and rip it. And that's not going to be healthy for the wood. So these are, put away your anvil pruners when you're pruning your blueberries. You can use those for your dormant roses or something like that. But what you want are your bypass pruners, and they work more like scissors. The blades pass each other. And they make a nice clean cut on live wood, live green wood, if they're sharp. So make sure your pruners, both your loppers and your bypass pruners are nice and sharp. If they're dull and rusted, then they're probably going to just smash the wood and rip it up too. So keep them in good shape. So this is what you want to use. And you also don't want to try to use these on anything that's more than about the size of your finger, because if you try to use a hand pruner on a really big cane, it's not going to go all the way through, and you're going to end up kind of ripping it up also. So just save that for more the top of the bush or very small canes at the bottom. Then the loppers are good for when you're working more in the lower part of the bush, when you're removing whole canes. And we're going to see some pictures of this. And the video also will show all that. So that's, you can get in there more because sometimes you're going to have to get around other canes if you want to take one out that's in the middle. So this gives you better reach and better leverage to get out those older, bigger pieces of wood. And then once again, a little hand saw, a little pruning saw for the really big cane or a really, really mature bush that has not been kept up with. And it's good to use some disinfectant. You know, this could be one of the things that's do as I say, not as I do. I don't do it between every bush, but I certainly have it with me. And if I sense that there's any kind of disease issue in a bush that I'm pruning, I will disinfect my pruners and my loppers. And if I use the saw, I would disinfect the saw before I go to the next bush, just to prevent the spread. So you just kind of have it with you, use it as you feel it is necessary. Or if you really want to be good, just use it between every bush. Lysol is it's effective and it's easy to use out in the field because you don't have to worry about it knocking over and spilling. Although these days it's very hard to find Lysol. I've been looking for it in the stores and it's just not there. But we've all been hoarding alcohol, so that's a good substitute. So I probably will just mix up a spray bottle with alcohol so I also don't have to worry about it spilling and take it out with me because I'm just about out of my Lysol. But those are the two best choices. You can use a Clorox solution, like 10%, I think, but just beware that it is corrosive to metal. So if you use Clorox, you want to make sure you oil your tools when you're done to keep them from corroding. So just some general notes. This is the best time to be pruning your blueberries. I just did mine last week. We're going to be doing the ones at the Heritage Farm next week. So January, February timeframe is the best. If you prune too early in the fall, there's still, you know, if we have some warm weather, they're going to try to start growing and then we'll get cold weather. And that would be harmful to that new wood. If you try to do it too late, they start bleeding out too much. The sap is flowing and it kind of oozes out all of its nutrients. So do it kind of when they're dormant and they're budding. So that's also when you can see kind of where your best fruit buds are. Your best goal is to get to leave 6 to 12 canes. Obviously, if you have a new bush, you're probably working up to that. But on a nice, well-established bush, 6 to 12 canes. Remember, the canes are the part that are coming from out of the crown. So that's a good goal. And you want kind of an equal number of 1 to 6-year-old canes. And again, you work towards this. You just take out your old canes, take out a couple old canes every year, and let some of the new ones take over. If you just do this every year, you're just naturally going to get a kind of a nice distribution of the age of your canes. And blueberries are one of the things where you do not have to follow the 30% rule. You can prune as much as 50 to 75% of the bush out. We at the Heritage Farm have actually done some renovation and we've kind of pruned it down almost to the ground just to try to rejuvenate them. And a lot of times that will work and they'll just start sending up a lot of new canes. So don't freak out if you feel like you're pruning out a lot, particularly in an old bush that has not been maintained. And the best shoots, remember the shoots are the parts up at the end of the branches, are like 8 to 12 inches long. And as I mentioned, they have a pretty equal number of fruit and vegetative buds. And it's not something you have to, really obsess over and sit there and count the fruiting and the vegetative buds on every shoot, but just kind of at a glance, you can kind of tell I have some of both. Okay, so step by step, again, I said it's really easy, and it really, really is. The first thing is you remove what we call the 3 Ds. That's any dead wood, diseased, or damaged wood. So you look at your bush when you first walk up to it and you see something, oh, this has definite, it's been eaten by a rabbit or something, gnawed on, or it's just obviously dead, just remove those first. And then you kind of just step back and look at the overall shape. And if it's really crowded in the interior, and that's where probably some of your old unproductive canes are, you want to start by getting some of those out of there. So just kind of look at the overall shape, kind of evaluate the older canes, and we're going to show some pictures in the video. We'll kind of show you what to look for. It's pretty obvious, again, when you look at them, what's an old cane and what's a new one. Any small whips at the ground, if they're really small and puny as they're coming up out of the ground, they're never going to grow to be very productive. So just go ahead and remove those now. After you've done that lower level, removing whole canes out, getting things out of there, then you want to move up into the top of the bush. You want to look at anything that's kind of just weak, just doesn't have many buds on it at all. It's just not being very productive. Anything that's crossing, or if it's growing through the middle of the bush and shading nice fruiting buds on the interior, get rid of those. Or any shoots that are just not very productive at all. And again, this is where John mentioned Pseudomonas mostly occurs in 1-year-old wood. And this is where you're going to see it, is in the upper level of your bush. So look for any signs of Pseudomonas and remove those in the upper side. And then disinfect your pruners before you go to the next bush. So I'm going to show some pictures of before and after. And then the video will also give you a good view of it. But I'm a very visual person, so this kind of thing always helps me. So you can see before pruning, here's a pretty healthy looking bush. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It has 10 canes, but so that's within the 6 to 12 cane limit right there, the recommendation. But some of these are probably old. I mean, this picture doesn't show it. And so you can see after pruning, like this little thing down here, it's kind of small. It's growing maybe out into a path. It's way down low, same as this one. Just go ahead and get rid of those, or they're not very productive. And then it looks like in this picture, like this one was taken out. No explanation as to why, but because we can't see the real picture of it. Or I think this one was, because it's crossing, it's on the inside, it looks thicker. It was probably an older cane. So next we have another picture, color coded. Again, it's showing that you would want to prune these little weak canes out, because they're not going to be very productive. In here, you had this one that was branching up this way and this way. So this is a case where the decision was made not to take the whole cane out down at the bottom, but to just take this part out. And I do that quite often too, because you'll find that your canes will branch apart. And sometimes part of that has very good growth, looks very productive, but the other part doesn't. And so it's perfectly fine to take part of it out. And you can see over here that half of that was taken out, just right there. It was just probably weak and in the middle, and perhaps was just older and not very productive. So what else was taken out here? Yeah, this is showing kind of it probably was not a very productive branch or shoots on that one. So you can see after pruning, and again, not a lot was taken out, but you're still left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 canes, which is a good number. And it just looks more open, more compact, you know, not going outside of its space, and still a lot of fruiting buds up here for this year's production. And here's an actual photo of before a pruning, and you can look, I can't even count how many are in here, but not a huge amount, but here's where you can see the difference between the old. This is obviously an old cane. It's gray. In some cases you can see, like here, you can see lichen on this one over here. And the new canes are redder. And so that's kind of going to be your key, is the red wood is what's showing you the newer growth. So you can see that red one is red kind of all the way up. It looks very healthy. And some of these others, though, are obviously very old. So by just looking at this, I would say we're probably want to take out that cane. It looks like it has a lot of lichen. It's kind of crossing over. It doesn't look like it's producing very much. Perhaps even this one next to it. But we're going to see the after picture. So they didn't. So in this, whoever did this one, they didn't take out that one. I thought they should. They took out part of it, the part that was growing on the inside. We couldn't see the whole photo. So, oh, I see why. Does anybody spot it? Where's my mouse? Okay, because this one had a very nice healthy cane growing up from this point. And these are the kind of decisions you'll be able to make as you look at your bush. Maybe you don't want to take out the whole thing this year, at least. Maybe next year it will all come out. But it had obviously a nice looking branch coming up from it, from further up the cane. And so it was deemed to be worth leaving it in for that. And we still didn't break the, go over 12 canes coming out of the ground. And then when you get up into the top, this is where you're going to pull out your hand pruners. And you can see nice healthy buds here, but you can see some of the tips are kind of dead. And I get this on mine every year. I think it's probably just either cold damage or something of that nature. You can actually even just take your fingers and snap those off. You don't even have to use hand pruners, but you certainly can use your hand pruners. Nothing's ever going to grow out of that. Nothing's ever going to produce out of that. So you might as well just snip those off, tidy it up. You can see in this picture, nice little vegetative buds here. You can see they're very flat, and the fruiting buds are very, enlarged. And so it's pretty obvious. So some of these are nice and healthy, but if you see some up here that are just kind of, if like this whole thing were just kind of weak and didn't have a lot of fruiting buds on it, you might want to take it down a little bit to where there is a nice healthy shoot. And again, you can show a million pictures, but it's not like going out and actually standing in front of a bush and seeing it in real life to get the experience. So you're going to get a handout, and we have a couple of good videos, their web address listed on that handout. We're going to show you one from University of Maine, and I think it's really good. And in fact, every year I rewatch it myself before I go out and prune my blueberries. It's like, I don't know, 6 to 7 minutes long. It's just a good refresher. He explains it very well. And so once I watch that every year, I'm like, okay, I remember now, because you only do this once a year. It's kind of hard to remember year to year. I kind of remember my, get in the right frame of mind, and I watch it, and then I go right out and prune my blueberries. So you can search like on YouTube, you can find lots of videos on pruning blueberries. My recommendation is just look for a good university-based source. I've found them from university or OSU. I found a really long one from, I think, North Carolina University. And sometimes their recommendations will vary a little bit. Like I've heard, rather than 6 to 12, I've heard 5 to 10 canes, but that's within the ballpark. But if you start just watching every little Joe Blow that's out there on YouTube, you might get pretty confused, and you're going to be getting all kinds of information which may or may not be valid. So I always say look for a university-based source. So we're going to watch one now from University of Maine, and Erica's going to be starting that up on her computer because she has better internet connectivity than I do. And but let's see, I can try to answer some questions while she gets that up and running. Okay. So somebody asked about pruning, and I meant to mention it, pruning young plants. Generally, when you first plant, you probably won't have to do much pruning for the first few years. And in fact, we recommend, and it's on the handout, that the first few years you take off the flower buds. You don't want the plant to put its energy into budding out and making fruit the first few years. You want it to put its energy into developing roots. I know that's really, really hard to do. So you're probably not going to need to do much pruning. I would still go out there, maybe you only need your hand pruners every year, just get in the habit, because you may have some weak shoots or damaged shoots or disease shoots that you do want to cut out. So you're probably not going to be removing whole canes except weak ones the first few years. But after about year 3, you're going to want to start your serious pruning. And when pruning, how can you tell which canes are not very productive? It'll be obvious. You just look at them and you're not going to see much growth. You're not going to see many fruiting buds. Okay, I think Erica, you can take it away. I can answer some of these questions on the Q&A.
I'm David Hanley, Vegetable and Small Fruit Specialist for the University of Maine, and today we're going to talk about pruning high bush blueberries. Now, typically with blueberries, we want to start pruning them in the dormant season, so this is going to be sometime between the end of December and probably early to late March here in Maine. You want to make sure they're fully dormant, because if you prune them too early in the fall, they're likely to sprout out and get winter injury. And if you prune them too late in the springtime after they've sprouted, then they're going to bleed a lot and you're going to create some advantages for diseases to get in there. What you're looking at here is a bush that's about 20 years old. What we want to do when we're pruning is keep this bush a good size and a good shape to be manageable, open it up so lots of light gets in there, and this will improve fruit size and fruit quality and make it mature a little bit earlier for us so it's not getting too late in the season. And what we want to see in a good mature blueberry bush is that it has about 6 to 12 canes coming from the base of the plant and providing the upright structure for the bush. Every year this bush will throw up new canes from the base, and you can see some of those here, those smaller red type canes here. And we're going to just leave a few of those, cut out the weaker ones, leave the stronger ones, and then to make sure the bush isn't getting too thick, we'll take out a couple of older canes every year and allow those new canes to replace them. So your final structure of a mature blueberry bush, it should have 6 to 12 canes, and those canes should range in age from 1 to 6 years old. Any cane that's older than 6 starts to produce nothing but very weak wood, so we prune out the older canes in favor of a few newer canes every year. And we'll do that right at the base of the plant. We cut these canes off right at the base of the plant. So we take out a couple of older canes, select a couple of new canes to replace them, then put your big pruners down and move up into the top of the plant, and we start thinning the shoots that we see up here. Now you'll notice there's different types of shoot growth. We can see here we have some nice strong shoots. This is last year's growth. These are what we call one-year-old shoots. And then down lower we have some smaller, weaker shoots. And if you look at the shoots carefully, you'll see there's two types of buds. Here at the tip of the shoot we have swollen buds, kind of teardrop shaped. These are fruit buds. When they break next spring, they'll have a flower cluster on them, about 6 to 8 flowers. Lower down we see these smaller, pointed buds. These are vegetative buds. When these break next spring, they'll give rise to shoots, which will be the shoot growth that bears fruit next year. So we want a nice shoot that has good length, good thickness, and a selection of fruiting buds at the tip and vegetative buds at the base. Branches like this that show nothing but weak shoots, we'll take that entire branch off in favor of a branch that's showing us a good combination of stronger shoots. So let's get to pruning. Put on your gloves, put on your glasses, wear long sleeves. These bushes can be a little bit prickly and can poke you if you're not being careful. Any of these branches that are getting out into the row, we'll just pop those right out of here and look at some of the stronger and weaker growth that we see here. And we can see we've got some new shoots in here, and we've got some of them that are fairly thin and not very strong. So we're going to select the best of those. That one's reaching out where I don't want it, so we'll get that. When we see lots of weak wood like this, not showing us much good growth on there, this can come out in favor of the newer wood that we see. And again, here I'm getting out into the row where I don't want to be, so I'll just take that off to a cane that's showing me some pretty good growth. Very weak growth, and this is an older cane. This whole thing can come out. You can tell the older ones because they have the thickest basal diameter, and they'll have the gray peeling bark. Oftentimes they'll even have lichen growing on them if you're in a moist environment like we have here. Some of these branches are just old dead wood, don't have any live growth on them at all, so of course these can come right out. And always look to see what you've got for strong shoots, and you can see here very small, weak, not much fruiting wood on them, so that can come out. And we just keep thinning away this older non-productive stuff. So a good job of pruning will also make sure that you're getting a good healthy crop every year. Okay, so we've gotten most of that weak wood out of there. As you can see, we've cut out all the weak and dead branches in favor of these nice strong shoots that we've got here with good fruit buds on there, and most of the weak ones are out. If there's still a few weak ones on there, you can just peel them off. You don't even really need to cut them with your pruners. You can just rip them right off like that, but you don't have to get all of them. Just try to get most of them so that we have mostly good strong fruiting shoots on here. And you can see how much we've opened up this bush, so lots of light, lots of air moving through there. This will reduce your disease problems. It will give us very good fruit size on these shoots that we've left behind. It'll ripen them more uniformly and earlier for us. And you can see that by opening up this bush, we're going to get lots of new shoots that will give us a good crop for next year.
Okay, Karen, you're back on.
Okay. I've just been answering questions in the Q&A.
There's a lot of questions coming in. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, some of the general questions have been, well, one of the things I didn't address is if you need to cut the canes off at a certain angle. I know sometimes when cutting out major wood, it's always recommended to cut it at an angle so that the rain and water slides off of it. I don't think it really matters that much for blueberries. And sometimes when you're trying to get in the middle to get into the cane that you want to cut out, it's kind of hard to get a certain angle. So the key is just try to get as close to the ground as you can. And it does, I wouldn't worry too much about whether it's at a slant or horizontal or whatever. Just try to get it out as close to the ground as you can get. And John, there were some questions that are more on your bailiwick. We've had a couple about, neither one of us addressed growing them in a pot, a container. I've seen them normal, I think northern high bush blueberries in very large containers, and they seem to do okay. But it seems to me you're going to have to worry more about making sure they get enough water and fertilizer. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think if you're going to choose a container, you're probably going to be better off using one of the varieties like the low bush or the half highs.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it's in a container, a high bush is in a container, is going to limit your fruit production anyway. So I think I'd shoot for something more appropriate size. So the half highs like North Country and North Blue are available in the nurseries now, and they'll do pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Someone asked about ammonium nitrate.
Ammonium nitrate is really what you're looking for is ammonium sulfate.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't really talk much about that. I like ammonium sulfate because it gives you the right kind of nitrogen, and it also gives you sulfur, which will acidify your soil as well as supply a nutrient that gets leached out of the soil with rain. It's also really easy to use. So ammonium nitrate would not be a particularly good choice because remember nitrates, blueberries can't use nitrates. And as a matter of fact, in high quantities, it can actually damage a blueberry. So I'd stay away from that.
Mm-hmm. And someone asked the ammonium sulfate amounts that you had in your slides, was that the yearly amount? So they have to divide that by 3?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought, but thought I'd check. Those were kind of the basic questions I'm seeing here.
Yeah, so folks are asking, can you just maybe share off the top of your head some of the frequently asked questions about blueberries and just kind of impart a little bit more wisdom to folks, maybe a couple of different points from each of you?
You mean that were asked today?
Well, that were asked today or that you'd like to embellish on or that you frequently answer, things that you just think would be parting advice.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, one of the questions we get asked a lot, and we've been talking about amongst ourselves, is propagating blueberries, and there have been quite a few questions today on this. And obviously, we're not covering propagation because we don't know much about it ourselves yet. It's something we keep talking about, but you know, our plate's been pretty full with just getting this field under control and starting a grape vineyard and those kinds of things. But we are experimenting this year with layering. One of our volunteers took it on himself to try that out. My understanding is starting them from cuttings is kind of a long process and kind of difficult. So we haven't really undertaken that yet, but we might. Maybe in the future there'll be a propagating blueberry class.
I hope so. I want to do that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be taking some cuttings off of our pruning this year and see if I can't learn a little about that. Yeah.
So stay tuned. and it does explain why blueberry plants are pretty expensive when you buy them in a nursery. So you get a new appreciation for that, and that's because they're harder to propagate. I think, I think the kinds of things that I would impart is and from most people, and it's whether it's pruning an apple tree or pruning blueberries, everybody's afraid when they first start out because they're thinking, oh, I'm removing all this fruit. And I keep, I always have to just keep reminding everybody, but you're going to get bigger, better fruit. And so you're going to be better off in the long run, and you're going to keep the health of the plant up for continuous fruit production. So don't be afraid to go out there and take a lot of a bush out. And the best advice I think I can give is just go out there and spend time looking at it, and it's going to become obvious what needs to come out, what's good, what's not good, and a picture, words only say so much. Just get the experience with your plants, and you'll be a pro.
Can
And
I
I don't
step
know-
in? Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Karen.
No, go
Can I
ahead.
step in and unroll the poll so that we can go ahead and get that done? And in the meantime, if John and Karen, if you want to look through the questions, there's 38 that have come in since you've been talking.
A lot of those are thank you very muches.
Yeah, but maybe if you would each pick one more, that way folks will stick
Okay.
around and finish the poll while you find a really good enticing question. So I'm
Okay.
going to go ahead and unleash that poll now. And please read the questions carefully. They are not duplicates, but there are before and after. So here we go.
John, we had some questions about mulch, kind of what kind of mulch and.
Okay.
Karen, do you mind? I want to just make sure folks can read the poll
Oh, sure,
questions.
sure.
So yeah, if you want to just take a second.
Okay.
I can tell how many people are taking the poll, and so I'll be able to tell when we have a good number. So I'm trusting that folks can see the poll. Karen and John, you guys can see the poll?
Yes.
Okay, starting to come in. Thank you.
But it says I can't vote. That's discrimination, Erica.
You might be biased. You might skew it. We'll just take another 30, 45 seconds here. The numbers are coming in. It's looking great. 73% of you have voted. Much appreciated. I like all this technology. This could actually ratchet up the percentage of survey questions we get answered. We're at 88% now. It's higher than usual. Very much appreciate it. Rebecca says COVID redemption. Yes, this is the way that we get what we need during COVID. Well, we're at a pretty nifty 92%. So I'm going to go ahead and give folks another 30 seconds or so, but I'm going to ask Karen and John one more time, just if you want to share maybe something as we close down. And I want to thank folks for coming, and watch for an email from me. I'll be sending out all the goodies that I mentioned, including a link to the video, including a handout, including a link to our answer clinic, so you can get your questions answered that may not have been answered today, and an opportunity to tell us that you want to join our mailing list. So thank you. And Karen and John, I'll let you close it up.
I do have one thing I neglected to mention, evidently, that choosing a fertilizer, I I recommend ammonium sulfate for the reasons, we talked about before, and it's cheap and easy to find. But if you want to use something else, anything that's labeled for rhododendrons or azaleas will work too. Just read the directions carefully. And then as far as the mulches go, the most common one you hear about, I don't see it a lot, is a rotted sawdust. Just make sure that you're not using fresh sawdust because that can damage the plants. But realistically, straw works really well. If you have corn cobs, that sort of thing, those things will all work well.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions about mulches and like coffee grounds, which it's better just to put the coffee grounds in your compost. But I mean, isn't it true you can just use compost or wood chips or salt? Yeah, like you said, not fresh sawdust. Someone asked about steer manure, and again, I would think it's just not fresh steer manure, but would you even put pure steer manure on, even if composted, or is that too much?
I would, sticking with the woody kinds of mulches is a good idea. Using composts and manures as mulches can work fine, but weeds will grow in them. They're not as good at weed suppression as like a straw or sawdust.
Yeah.
It's personal preference.
And one thing that I have learned personally is to prevent mummyberry. If you start to get a mummyberry issue, is to apply a nice thick layer of mulch in the March-April timeframe before the bushes bloom, because the mummyberry spores are living on the ground and they get into the blossom. And so I have found that eliminated almost all of my mummyberry, and I don't have to spray anything. So that's what I do every year. So I kill two birds with one stone with my mulching.
Okay, well, on that note, I think we're going to send you off, and it's a great day for pruning. So get out there and get your blueberries pruned, and perhaps we'll see several of you at our great pruning workshop next month. Thank you and have a great afternoon.